The quiet neighborhood of Pine Creek had always been a peaceful place, where neighbors waved hello, and the biggest drama was usually about someone forgetting to mow their lawn. That was, until the strange case of the repeatedly destroyed mailbox began. Mike Johnson, a retired engineer in his 60s, had lived in his corner house for over 30 years. With gray hair and kind eyes behind wire-framed glasses, he was known around the neighborhood as the guy who could fix anything. Kids would bring him their broken toys, and neighbors would ask for help with home repairs. Mike never turned anyone away. He lived alone since his wife had passed away 5 years ago, finding comfort in his workshop where he tinkered with electronics and small inventions. His daily routine was simple: coffee on the porch at sunrise, a walk around the neighborhood, and hours spent in his garage workshop. The trouble began on an ordinary Tuesday morning. Mike stepped out to collect his mail, only to find his mailbox bent and damaged, lying on the ground. Tire tracks in the mud suggested someone had deliberately swerved to hit it. Probably just some teenagers having fun, he muttered to himself as he picked up the mangled metal box. It wasn't worth getting upset about. He spent that afternoon installing a new mailbox, slightly sturdier than the previous one. 3 days later, the new mailbox met the same fate. This time, Mike found it completely flattened, as if someone had taken a baseball bat to it. The sight made his heart sink. Mail was scattered across his front yard, some letters soaked from the morning dew. His neighbor, Mrs. Chen, was watering her flowers when she saw Mike staring at the destroyed mailbox. "That's the second one this week," she called out. "I heard a car late last night. Thought I saw someone driving by really fast around midnight." Mike nodded, collecting his soggy letters. Probably just kids playing pranks. But by the 5th destroyed mailbox in 3 weeks, Mike wasn't laughing anymore. Each replacement cost money, and the hassle of reinstalling them was becoming tiresome for a man his age. What bothered him most was that he couldn't understand why someone would target him specifically. He decided to take action and set up a small camera hidden in the bushes near his driveway. The following night, just after 11 p.m., the footage captured a blue sedan slowing down in front of his house. A woman leaned out the passenger window and swung what looked like a baseball bat, smashing the mailbox with one clean hit. The car then sped away, but not before the camera caught a glimpse of the license plate. Mike rewatched the footage several times, confused. The driver was a woman who appeared to be in her 30s. He didn't recognize her at all. Why would a stranger have such a vendetta against his mailbox? The next morning, Mike took the footage to the local police station. Officer Reynolds viewed the video and wrote down the license plate number. "I recognize her," Officer Reynolds said with a sigh. "That's Tina Wilson. We've had a few complaints about her before. She lives on the other side of town. But why would she target my mailbox?" Mike asked, genuinely confused. Officer Reynolds shuffled some papers. "Ms. Wilson has been going through some personal difficulties. Her father was a mail carrier who was fired after an incident in this neighborhood about 15 years ago. He passed away last month." Mike's eyes widened as the pieces came together. "Thomas Wilson? He was my mail carrier years ago. I had to report him for repeatedly misdelivering important packages. That complaint was part of what led to his dismissal," Officer Reynolds confirmed. "Ms. Wilson might be acting out some misplaced revenge." The officer assured Mike they would speak with Tina, but warned that without significant property damage, there wasn't much they could do besides issue a warning. Mike left the station feeling unsatisfied. A warning wouldn't stop someone who was determined enough to return night after night. As he drove home, a plan began forming in his mind. If the law couldn't protect his property, perhaps he needed to take matters into his own hands, not through confrontation, but through his skills as an engineer. For the next week, Mike spent every waking hour in his workshop. The sounds of drilling, sawing, and welding could be heard throughout the day. Neighbors grew curious, especially when they noticed Mike digging a small trench from his garage to the mailbox post. "Just doing some landscaping," he'd say with a mysterious smile whenever anyone asked. What Mike was actually creating was a special kind of mailbox, one that appeared completely normal from the outside but contained a sophisticated defense system. First, he reinforced the post with a steel pipe cemented 3 feet into the ground. Then he constructed the mailbox itself from heavy-duty steel, disguised with regular mailbox paint. But the real genius was in the special features. Mike installed pressure sensors that could detect when someone was trying to vandalize the mailbox. When triggered, the system would activate a series of harmless but effective countermeasures. On the 7th night, just as Mike finished testing his creation, the doorbell rang. It was Officer Reynolds. "Just wanted to let you know we spoke with Ms. Wilson," he said. "She denied everything, despite the video evidence. I'm afraid she seemed pretty determined to continue." Mike nodded thoughtfully. "I appreciate you trying, officer. What's that you're building?" Reynolds asked, noticing the workshop lights on. "Oh, just a new mailbox," Mike replied casually. "Thought I'd make this one a bit sturdier." After the officer left, Mike installed his creation at the end of his driveway. From the outside, it looked like any ordinary mailbox, perhaps a bit larger than most, but nothing that would draw attention. Mike stepped back to admire his work, then went inside to wait. For 2 nights, nothing happened. Mike began to wonder if Tina had been scared off by the police visit after all. Then, on the 3rd night, just after midnight, he was awakened by a notification on his phone. The sensors had been triggered. Mike quickly grabbed his robe and rushed to the front window. In the dim glow of the street lights, he could see the now familiar blue sedan parked in front of his house. A figure emerged from the passenger side, baseball bat in hand, approaching his mailbox with determined strides. Mike didn't move to stop her. Instead, he watched, holding his breath as Tina Wilson raised the bat high above her head and swung it with all her might toward his creation. What happened next would become the talk of Pine Creek for years to come. The bat connected with the mailbox with a resounding thunk, but instead of caving in, the mailbox stood firm. Tina looked confused for a moment, then swung again with even more force. This time, something unexpected happened. The moment the bat hit the reinforced steel, the pressure sensors triggered. First, bright LED floodlights hidden in Mike's front yard bushes suddenly illuminated the entire scene, bathing Tina in harsh white light. She froze, momentarily blinded, the bat still in her hands. Then came the water. Mike had connected a modified sprinkler system to the mailbox trigger. 4 hidden sprinkler heads popped up from the ground around the mailbox and began spraying powerful jets of water in all directions. Within seconds, Tina was completely soaked. But that wasn't all. As she stumbled backward, trying to escape the unexpected shower, a small compartment at the top of the mailbox opened, and a camera emerged, capturing clear images of her face, the bat, and the license plate of her car. To complete the experience, a pre-recorded message began to play through a weatherproof speaker hidden inside the mailbox: "Vandalism detected. Photos captured and uploaded to cloud storage. Police have been notified." Tina dropped the bat and ran back to her car, dripping wet and clearly panicked. She sped away, tires squealing on the asphalt. Mike couldn't help but laugh as he watched from his window. He hadn't actually set the system to automatically call the police, he wasn't trying to get her arrested, just to stop the vandalism. But she didn't need to know that. The next morning, Mike surveyed his handiwork in the daylight. The mailbox stood proudly, showing barely a dent from the previous night's attack. He collected his mail with a satisfied smile, nodding to Mrs. Chen, who was giving him a curious look from her yard. "Quite a light show last night," she called over. "And were those sprinklers going off at midnight?" Mike just shrugged. "Must have been a malfunction in the system," he said with a wink. For a full week, there were no more attacks. Mike began to think that his problem was solved. Then, 9 days after the sprinkler incident, he woke up to find not vandalism, but a note taped to his mailbox. The handwriting was shaky but legible. "I know what you did to my father. This isn't over." Mike sighed as he crumpled the note. He had hoped the incident would be the end of it, but clearly, Tina Wilson wasn't ready to let go of her grudge. That evening, Mike sat in his living room, thinking about Thomas Wilson. He remembered him as a gruff mail carrier who had repeatedly misdelivered or lost important packages. After several complaints and a formal investigation, Thomas had been fired. Mike had never thought much about it afterward. Postal workers came and went, and Thomas had been replaced by a friendly young woman who did her job properly. But now, 15 years later, the consequences of that complaint had come back to haunt him. Mike tried to imagine how Tina must feel, believing that a stranger had ruined her father's life. He wondered if Thomas had struggled after losing his job, if that had affected his relationship with his daughter. For the first time, Mike felt a pang of sympathy for Tina. Not enough to let her destroy his property, but enough to wonder if there might be a better way to resolve this situation than an ongoing prank war. The next day, Mike went to the local library and asked to use their computer. He wasn't very tech-savvy when it came to social media, but he managed to find Tina Wilson's profile. Her recent posts were filled with grief over her father's passing, mentioning how he had never recovered after losing the job he loved. According to her posts, Thomas had struggled with depression and alcohol after being fired, creating a difficult home environment. Mike sat back in his chair, suddenly understanding the depth of Tina's anger. His simple complaint all those years ago had set off a chain of events that had affected real lives in ways he'd never considered. As he drove home, Mike wondered what to do next. The engineered mailbox had protected his property, but it hadn't solved the real problem. The note made it clear that Tina wasn't finished. And now that he understood more about her motivation, he wasn't sure if his clever revenge was the right approach after all. That night, Mike couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about Thomas Wilson and his daughter, about grief and blame and forgiveness. By morning, he had made a decision. Mike sat at his kitchen table early the next morning, writing a letter. He chose his words carefully, wanting to get this right. After several drafts, he finally had something he was satisfied with. Dear Tina Wilson. You don't know me, but I'm the man whose mailbox you've been destroying. I was also the person who filed a complaint about your father 15 years ago. I want you to know that I never intended for him to lose his job. I only wanted my mail delivered correctly. I didn't know until recently how this affected your family. I'm truly sorry for the pain this caused. While I can't change the past, I would like to talk with you if you're willing. There's a coffee shop called Maggie's on Oak Street. I'll be there tomorrow at 2 p.m. Sincerely, Michael Johnson. Mike sealed the letter in an envelope, addressed it to Tina Wilson, and drove across town to her apartment building. He felt nervous as he slipped the envelope under her door, wondering if this was foolish or dangerous. But he knew he had to try. The next day, Mike arrived at Maggie's half an hour early. He chose a table near the back with a clear view of the door and ordered a coffee that he barely touched. As 2 p.m. came and went, Mike began to think Tina wasn't coming. He couldn't blame her. At 2:27 p.m., the bell above the door jingled, and a woman walked in. She was in her mid-30s, with tired eyes and dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. Mike recognized her from the mailbox camera footage, though she looked different in daylight, smaller somehow, less menacing. Tina spotted him and hesitated before slowly walking over to his table. "You're the mailbox guy," she said, remaining standing. Mike nodded. "Thank you for coming. Would you like to sit down?" After a moment's hesitation, Tina slid into the chair across from him, her posture tense and defensive. "I got your letter," she said. "I don't know why I came. I still hate you." "I understand," Mike replied quietly. And you have every right to be angry. This seemed to surprise her. You ruined my dad's life. Mike took a deep breath. I never meant for that to happen. I just wanted my packages delivered correctly. I didn't know he'd lose his job, or what that would mean for your family. Well, he did lose his job. And then he lost everything else. His pride, his savings, eventually our house. Her voice shook slightly. He started drinking. He was never the same. Mike nodded, listening. I'm truly sorry, Tina. If I had known, I might have handled things differently. An uncomfortable silence fell between them. The waitress came by and Tina ordered a black coffee. That mailbox trick was pretty clever, she finally said, a hint of reluctant admiration in her voice. Did you build that yourself? I did, Mike replied. I've always been good with my hands. Used to be an engineer. My dad was good with his hands too, Tina said quietly. Before everything fell apart. Another silence, less tense this time. I have a proposition for you, Mike said carefully. If you're willing to hear it. What kind of proposition? Tina asked, suspicion evident in her voice. Mike leaned forward. I run a small workshop where I fix things for people in the neighborhood. I could use some help, and from what you said about your father's skills, I'm guessing you might have picked up a thing or two from him. Tina's eyes narrowed. Are you offering me a job? Out of pity? Not pity, Mike said firmly. I genuinely need the help. My arthritis makes some of the detailed work difficult these days. And? He hesitated. I think your father would want you to use the skills he taught you instead of using them to destroy mailboxes. Tina flinched at that, then stared down at her coffee. I don't know much. Dad tried to teach me before things got bad. I can do basic wiring, some carpentry. That's a start, Mike said. I can teach you the rest. Why would you do this? Tina asked. After what I did to your property? Mike thought for a moment. When my wife died 5 years ago, I was angry at the world. I wanted someone to blame. The doctors, the hospital, even God. But eventually I realized that my anger wasn't helping anyone, especially not me. It was just making me bitter. He looked Tina in the eyes. Your father's gone. Smashing my mailbox won't bring him back or fix what happened. But maybe we can both find something better than anger. Tina didn't respond immediately. She finished her coffee, seemingly deep in thought. I have a job at the supermarket, she finally said. But it's only part-time. I could maybe help out a few days a week. That would be perfect, Mike replied, trying not to show his relief too openly. And I pay fair wages. This isn't charity. I'll think about it, Tina said, standing up. That's all I can promise. Mike nodded. That's fair. Here's my number if you decide you're interested. He handed her a business card with his details. And Tina? Whatever you decide about the job, please stop attacking my mailbox. I've got plenty of water left in those sprinklers. For the first time, a ghost of a smile appeared on Tina's face. That was pretty embarrassing, getting soaked like that. It was meant to be, Mike admitted. As Tina turned to leave, she paused. My dad wasn't always a mess, you know. Before everything happened, he was good to me. He taught me how to ride a bike, helped me with school projects. That's the dad I miss. He sounds like he was a good father, Mike said gently. Tina nodded, blinking rapidly. See you around, maybe, she said, and walked out of the coffee shop. Mike sat there for a while after she left, wondering if he'd ever hear from her again. He hoped so, but he knew healing took time. Sometimes a lot of time. A week passed with no word from Tina. Mike's mailbox remained untouched, which was something. He took that as a positive sign. Then, on the following Tuesday morning, his doorbell rang. Mike opened the door to find Tina standing on his porch, looking uncomfortable but determined. She wore jeans and a faded blue work shirt, her hair tied back. "I didn't think you'd come," Mike said, surprised. "Neither did I," Tina admitted. "But I keep thinking about what you said. About my dad wanting me to use what he taught me." She shifted her weight from one foot to the other. "Plus, my manager at the supermarket cut my hours again." Mike nodded, understanding both the spoken and unspoken reasons for her change of heart. "Well, I'm glad you're here. Come on in, I'll show you the workshop." He led her through the house to the converted garage at the back. The space was organized chaos. Workbenches lined the walls, covered with various projects in different stages of completion. Tools hung on pegboards, and shelves stacked with parts and materials reached to the ceiling. "It's not much, but it keeps me busy," Mike said, watching Tina take it all in. "What kind of things do you fix?" she asked, approaching a table where a disassembled toaster sat next to a schematic drawing. "Whatever the neighbors bring in. Small appliances mostly, some furniture repair, basic electronics. I don't charge much, just enough to cover parts and a little for my time." Tina picked up a screwdriver, turning it over in her hands. "Dad had a set just like this. Phillips head, perfectly balanced." "Quality tools make all the difference," Mike agreed. "So, you want to start today? I've got a clock that needs fixing. The gears are stuck, but I think we can get it running again." Tina hesitated only briefly before nodding. "I can stay for a few hours." They worked side by side at the bench, Mike explaining each step as they carefully disassembled the old mantel clock. Tina was a quick learner, her hands steady as she helped clean the tiny gears and apply fresh oil to the mechanisms. As they worked, the initial awkwardness between them gradually faded. Mike shared stories about his engineering days, and Tina occasionally mentioned memories of watching her father fix things around their house when she was young. "He always said you should understand how something works before you try to fix it," Tina said, carefully placing a gear back into position. "Your father was right about that," Mike replied. "Sounds like he knew what he was doing, at least with repairs." By the time they reassembled the clock and heard the satisfying tick of the mechanism coming back to life, 4 hours had passed. Mike was impressed with Tina's natural aptitude. "You've got good instincts," he told her as they cleaned up the workbench. "Must run in the family." Tina gave a small, sad smile at that. "Thanks. This was, actually nice. Different than I expected." "Different how?" Mike asked. Tina struggled to find the words. "I've been so angry for so long. At you, at the post office, at everything. It felt good to make something work instead of breaking things." As Tina prepared to leave, Mike handed her an envelope. "First day's pay. Fair wage for fair work." Tina looked surprised. "I didn't expect to get paid today. It was just a trial run." "Work is work," Mike said firmly. "Can you come back Thursday?" After a moment's hesitation, Tina nodded. "Thursday works." Over the next few weeks, a routine developed. Tina would come to Mike's workshop 3 days a week, usually in the afternoons after her supermarket shift. The awkwardness between them gradually dissolved as they worked together on various projects, from fixing Mrs. Chen's antique radio to rewiring lamps and repairing the neighborhood kids' broken toys. One Thursday afternoon, as they were working on restoring an old bicycle for the son of a single mother down the street, Mike noticed Tina seemed distracted. "Something on your mind?" he asked, looking up from the chain he was oiling. Tina hesitated, then set down the wrench she was using. "Today's the 1-month anniversary of my dad's death," she admitted quietly. "I was going to visit his grave after work." Mike nodded, understanding. "You should take the rest of the day off. Go be with your dad. Thanks, Tina said. But I'd rather keep busy, actually. When I'm working, I feel closer to him somehow. Like I'm carrying on something that mattered to him. Mike respected that. They continued working in companionable silence for a while before Tina spoke again. I found a box of his things last night. Old photos, some tools, paperwork from his postal service days. She paused. There was a letter of recommendation from his supervisor before your complaint. Mike set down his rag, giving Tina his full attention. It said he was punctual and hardworking. That he took pride in his route. Tina's voice wavered slightly. I never knew that side of him. By the time I was old enough to remember clearly, he was already bitter about losing his job. People are complicated, Mike said gently. We all have different sides. Different chapters in our lives. Tina nodded, blinking back tears as she focused intently on adjusting the bicycle's brakes. I've been blaming you for so long. It was easier than accepting that he made mistakes too. That he chose how to handle what happened. Mike let her work through her thoughts, not interrupting. Anyway, she continued after composing herself, I wanted to say I'm sorry. For the mailboxes. It was stupid and childish. Water under the bridge, Mike assured her. Or water from the sprinklers, in this case. That earned a genuine laugh from Tina. I still can't believe you engineered that whole system just to defend your mailbox. Professional pride, Mike said with a grin. I couldn't let my reputation as the neighborhood fix-it guy be damaged by a persistent mailbox smasher. As they finished the bicycle repairs, Mike had an idea. If you want company later, when you visit your dad, I wouldn't mind going with you. Only if you want, of course. Tina looked surprised. You'd do that? After everything? Sometimes healing happens better together than alone, Mike said simply. After they cleaned up the workshop, they drove in separate cars to the cemetery on the edge of town. Mike waited respectfully at a distance while Tina placed flowers on her father's grave. Then, to his surprise, she waved him over. Dad, she said softly to the headstone. There's someone I want you to meet. The cemetery visit marked a turning point in Mike and Tina's relationship. Standing together at Thomas Wilson's grave, they'd found a kind of peace neither had expected. Tina had spoken to her father's headstone, telling him about the workshop and the skills she was learning. Mike had stood quietly beside her, offering silent support. As summer turned to fall, Tina became a fixture in Mike's life and his workshop. Her part-time hours at the supermarket had been cut further, but she didn't seem to mind. The work with Mike was more fulfilling, and he made sure to pay her fairly for every job they completed. Word spread through the neighborhood about the talented duo who could fix almost anything. Soon, they had more repair requests than they could handle. People would drop off broken items with notes describing the problems, and Mike and Tina would work through them methodically, side by side. We need a better system, Mike said one day, looking at the growing pile of projects waiting for their attention. Maybe a proper intake form, something to track the jobs. Tina nodded, wiping grease from her hands with a rag. And we should start scheduling pickups. People keep coming by at all hours to collect their stuff. Good thinking, Mike agreed. We're becoming a real business here. Is that what we are? Tina asked, looking around the workshop that had become like a second home to her. Mike considered this. I suppose we are. Partners, even. The word hung in the air between them, carrying more weight than just a business arrangement. Both of them felt it. This strange friendship forged from conflict had become something meaningful to them both. That evening, as Tina was leaving, Mike handed her a small wooden box. What's this? She asked, opening it to find a set of precision screwdrivers with beautifully turned wooden handles. I made them, Mike said. The handles, I mean. The tools are professional grade. Every good technician should have their own tools. Tina ran her fingers over the smooth wood, touched by the gesture. These are beautiful. Thank you. Those were going to be for my son, Mike said quietly. If I'd had one. My wife and I couldn't have children, though we wanted them. Tina looked up, surprised by this personal revelation. That's part of why the workshop became so important to me, Mike continued. Creating things, fixing things, it filled a void. Tina nodded, understanding. Dad was the same way. When he lost his job, he lost his purpose. That's why he fell apart. Purpose is important, Mike agreed. Finding it, keeping it. A comfortable silence fell between them as Tina carefully closed the box of screwdrivers. I've been thinking, she said finally. The apartment I'm renting is getting too expensive since my hours were cut. I've been looking for something cheaper. Mike hesitated, then said, I have a spare room. Used to be my home office, but I never use it now. The workshop is where I spend most of my time anyway. Their eyes met, both surprised by the offer. Are you sure? Tina asked. Only if you want, Mike said quickly. No pressure. Just an option. After a moment, Tina nodded slowly. I'll think about it. It would make sense, with all the time I spend here anyway. As she left that evening, both knew something significant had shifted between them. 2 weeks later, Tina moved into Mike's spare room. The arrangement made sense practically, she saved on rent, and the commute to both the workshop and her remaining supermarket shifts was much shorter. They established ground rules and boundaries, each respecting the other's privacy and space. What neither of them had anticipated was how natural it would feel. Tina was tidy and considerate, pitching in with household chores without being asked. Mike enjoyed having someone to share meals with again, realizing how lonely his evenings had been since his wife's passing. One cool October evening, as they sat on the porch drinking tea after a long day in the workshop, Mike had an idea. You know, he said, looking out at the yard where fallen leaves danced in the breeze, I've been thinking about the business. It's really grown. Tina nodded, cupping her mug for warmth. We had 6 completed repairs just today. What would you think about making it official? A real partnership. Wilson and Johnson Repair Shop. Or Johnson and Wilson. Whichever sounds better to you. Tina nearly spilled her tea. Are you serious? Never been more serious, Mike replied. You've got the skills now. You're as good at most repairs as I am, better at some. You've got a knack for the electronics that my old fingers struggle with. I don't know what to say, Tina admitted, clearly moved by the offer. You don't have to decide right away, Mike assured her. But I'm not getting any younger. I'd like to know the business will continue, that all those neighborhood relationships will be maintained. Tina was quiet for a long moment. Wilson and Johnson sounds nice, she finally said. Dad would have liked that, seeing our name on a repair shop. Mike smiled. Wilson and Johnson it is, then. The following weekend, they celebrated their new partnership with a small gathering in the backyard. Mrs. Chen brought her famous dumplings, and other neighbors contributed dishes and drinks. The evening was warm with laughter and conversation. The workshop door opened to display their new hand-painted sign, Wilson and Johnson Repair Shop, we fix almost anything. As the party wound down and guests began to leave, Officer Reynolds stopped by, eyebrows raising at the sight of Tina helping Mike clean up. Well, this is unexpected, he said, accepting the plate of food Mike offered him. Last time I saw you two together, we were discussing vandalism charges. Mike chuckled. Life takes strange turns, doesn't it? Very strange, Reynolds agreed, looking between them. But good ones, it seems. After the officer left, Tina and Mike sat alone in the yard, enjoying the quiet evening. I've been meaning to ask you something, Tina said. Whatever happened to that special mailbox you built? The one with the sprinklers and cameras? Mike grinned. Funny you should ask. I took it apart about a month ago. Used the pressure sensors for Mrs. Abernathy's automatic plant watering system. So we have a regular mailbox now? Tina asked, sounding almost disappointed. Seemed like we didn't need the defense system anymore, Mike replied with a shrug. Tina was quiet for a moment, then said thoughtfully, you know, with our skills combined, we could build an even better one. Not for defense, but just because we can. Something really special. Mike's eyes lit up at the suggestion. I like the way you think, partner. 1 year after Tina had first swung a bat at Mike's mailbox, they stood together at the end of the driveway, admiring their creation. The new mailbox was a masterpiece of engineering and craftsmanship, the result of evenings spent designing and weekends dedicated to building. From the outside, it looked like an elegant, oversized wooden mailbox with a metal flag. But looks were deceiving. This mailbox was special. Want to do the honors? Mike asked, handing Tina a small remote control. She grinned and pressed the button. The top of the mailbox smoothly split open like a blooming flower, revealing a rotating inner compartment that sorted mail into different sections, one for letters, one for small packages, and a secure locked box for important documents. The solar panels are working perfectly, Mike noted, pointing to the nearly invisible strips embedded in the roof of the mailbox. Should keep the battery charged even during cloudy weather. And the weather sensors? Tina asked. Mike pressed another button on the remote, and a small digital display lit up on the side of the mailbox, showing temperature, humidity, and barometric pressure. Working like a charm. Mrs. Chen will be checking it every morning, I guarantee it. They'd even added a small camera connected to their home Wi-Fi that would alert them when mail was delivered or when someone approached the mailbox, a security feature inspired by the original defense system, but with a much friendlier purpose. It's beautiful, Tina said, running her hand over the smooth wood she had carefully sanded and stained. Hard to believe this all started because I was trying to destroy your mailbox. Life works in mysterious ways, Mike replied. Sometimes the worst things lead to the best outcomes. As they stood admiring their creation, Mrs. Chen called from across the street, Is that the famous mailbox I've been hearing about? The whole neighborhood's been talking about what you two were building. Soon, a small crowd of neighbors had gathered, oohing and awing as Mike and Tina demonstrated all the features. Several people immediately asked if they could have custom mailboxes too. Looks like we found our next business opportunity, Mike said with a laugh. Wilson and Johnson Mailbox Designs. I like the sound of that, Tina agreed. Later that evening, as they sat in the workshop sketching ideas for their first custom order, Tina grew quiet. Something on your mind? Mike asked. I was just thinking about Dad, she said. Today's his birthday. He would have been 62. Mike nodded, understanding. Want to visit the cemetery tomorrow? Already went this morning, Tina said. But I told him about the mailbox. About us. About everything. She smiled softly. I think he would be proud. Not of how I handled things at first, but of where I ended up. I think he would be too, Mike said gently. As the seasons continued to change, the special mailbox at the end of Mike's driveway became something of a local landmark. Children would press the visitor button to watch the compartments rotate. The postal carriers were initially confused but soon came to appreciate the innovation. And whenever anyone asked about the story behind the unusual mailbox, Mike and Tina would share a knowing smile before one of them would begin. Well, it all started when she kept smashing his mailbox, so he built one that fought back.